At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Matthew, welcome to the show. How are you?
Dr. Doug, I screwed up my own intro. Dr. Doug, how the hell are you?
Good. Hey, it's great to have you on the show, and it's great to have a fellow podcaster on the show. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I wanted to introduce myself to you first and foremost. My name is Matthew Cannelis. I'm a high school English teacher out of Staten Island, New York, by way of East Brunswick, New Jersey. Been doing it for about 10 years now. I'm co-host of my own podcast called the Classroads Podcast with one of my former students and current friends, 18-4 amateur boxer. But his name is Anthony Laeta. Hopefully by the time this comes out, he'll be a 19-4, 20-4 amateur boxer. So, very, very happy to be here, Dr. Doug. Very, very happy.
Well, and I appreciate that. And you know what I find interesting is the story behind what brought you to this point. Now, obviously, you've become a teacher. I'd love to know why you became a teacher, number one. But number two, what motivated you to start your podcast? What were the things that said to you, okay, it's time to start a podcast, and then talk about the things you're going to talk about?
Yeah, so becoming a teacher was not an easy choice, but it was a simple choice. I always wanted to help people. That's my MO just in life in general. My mother was a English teacher as well. She was more with the elementary school kids, but my forte is obviously the older grades, high school, kind of 9th to 12th grade from about 14 to 18. But I wanted to help people, and English was my best subject. I'll just be honest. That's why I wanted to do it. It was almost where I saw myself fit in. And ever since then, I consider myself a mentor to a bunch of my current and former students that have stuck with me throughout the 10 years that I've been doing this. And I'm very, very grateful for all of them. And that brings me to the podcast. I actually, as I did in my intro, I do a podcast with a former student who is one of, if not one of my best friends, Anthony Laeta. And we formed this podcast because when I was his teacher many moons ago, he goes, you should start a podcast. And I had a podcast back in 2014. That show will remain nameless because I don't know how to log in. I don't know how to log into the old YouTube account. And those episodes are still up there. Maybe on my podcast, we'll get into those, but at a later date. But he goes, why don't you do the podcast? And as a joke, I kind of said, yeah, okay, if you do it with me. And he said, okay, I'm in. And I go, really? You're in? And he goes, yeah, why not? It'll be fun. And I go, you know what? If you're in, I'll buy all the equipment, all the updated equipment, all the updated software. I'll put in the legwork and we'll do it together. Because the reason why I never did a podcast and always talked about it, I couldn't really find the niche for it. I couldn't find where I would go into this ever-growing podcasting market because let's face it, everybody has a podcast and you don't want to have a podcast that talks about the same thing over and over again. You want to have a podcast that could maybe appeal to different walks of life. And we are, and I credit us as being the #1 live teacher-student podcast in the world. As far as I know, we're the only one of its kind where we're live to tape. And we talk about our generationalities, our commonalities, things that make our lives so parallel. I'll be 32 in June. He's going to be 20 in July. And it's the concept of it is to show how similar our lives and our upbringings are, and to show where we do contrast in different elements. And I'm sure by the time this comes out, we're going to have episodes that come out where we do argue about different things. And he sometimes doesn't get my references because I'm about 12 years older than him, 11 years older than him. So in a nutshell, that's kind of why we started the podcast, because I feel like we do have this this area that we can foster, facilitate, and hopefully grow.
That's great. And so, as a high school teacher,
yeah,
how did that affect how has that affected you? I mean, you know, it's interesting how teachers have different personalities and so forth, but for your 10 years, how has that affected you as a person? How has it changed you, if it has?
Oh, it 1,000,000,000,000% has. I am not the same person that I was when I stepped into a classroom for the first time in 2014. I have grown immensely in terms of mostly patience. I never thought I would develop the patience that I have with, and I don't think I would have had I not become a teacher. Because not saying that I was a hothead, but I'm from New York. Let's face it, New Yorkers, do we have patience? I don't know. I'm not sure if we're exactly known for our patience. So in that way, but also to not be as judgmental and be a lot more understanding, because I teach all walks of life. If you can name it, I've taught it. People who come from different backgrounds, socioeconomically, different religions, different races. People have taught me or tried to teach me different languages, and I don't have a knack for different languages, but it's nice that they try. But definitely not being as narrow-minded. I can give you an example of that. I remember years ago when I first started, I was the teacher that I thought I had to go into classroom and be the guy that didn't smile. And I don't think I've stopped smiling since I've been on this call with you. So that's not my personality to be like,
Yeah.
oh, do your work. Do your work. Come on, everybody. This is not me. But they teach you in college, that's how you have to be. And I never, I subscribed to that school of thought when I first went into the classroom because I thought that's what you had to do. But since then, I haven't subscribed to that thought, because I remember an instance where the class completely turned on me and was like, why would we listen to you right now? What, just because you're this mean guy, you're trying to teach us about Shakespeare? And I remember, without giving too much away of anybody's personal stories, I remember a couple of the students pulling me aside and like talking to me on a personal level, and almost being like, you don't have to put on this act anymore. You don't have to be like this mean guy, because we're talking to you now like it's normal, and like you and I are talking at this very, very moment. And that helped shed that hard exterior that colleges do put on you. And I was trained great. Dr. Leibman from St. Francis College is and still is a mentor of mine. And he was the only one that kind of steered me in the direction where we have to care about our kids. And as I've grown as a teacher, 10 years in, I feel like I care almost too much about my students now. It's almost a blessing and a curse. So.
Well, and isn't it interesting how we experience this whole concept of this is what you need to do, this is how you need to be, and we buy into that. And you're right, it happens in college, it happens in every environment we can think of, whether it's just the family or whether it's our friends or whether it's religion or whether it's college or school or whatever. And what have you, as you observe that in your students, here's the question. I mean, for you came out of that with some experiences that caused you to make that change, which I find really comes down to the fact that you have become who you really are. So when you're working with your students, how many of your students do you observe doing and being who they, quote, need to be, or who they should be, or how they should act? And if you're observing that, how do you help them to make that change, to understand that, you know what, you need to become who you really are, and honor that and appreciate that and love that?
That's a definite great question. Great question. And it's a loaded one too. I'll answer it as best I can. I'll answer it as best I can. I have the luxury of being an English teacher. That's what I'll start off by saying. I can have kids write about anything, really, as long as it somewhat confines to the curriculum that I'm teaching. But we have a lot of free reign to have different writing assignments. And that's usually in September, where I give a lot of personal and reflective essays, or just like writing prompts to give. And a lot of the times they will open up in those initial writing prompts. Sometimes they don't, but that just comes with their personality. And how do I get them to open up and be who they really are? Usually, and I'm all about building connections. I try and build a connection with everybody who walks into my door. And without those connections, I don't think that they can even learn what you're trying to teach them content wise. So I read all of the essays that anybody writes, all those reflective essays that I give in the very beginning of the year. And I'll try and take a piece of that essay and connect on a very, very, at first, very superficial level, and then use that as kind of a groundbreaking area in order to get below the surface. For instance, I have this kid, a couple of years ago, I'm a huge pro wrestling fan, and he was wearing a Stone Cold Steve Austin shirt. And I was like, oh, I love Stone Cold Steve Austin, the minute that he walked into the room. And that's not part of the reflective essay, but I remember building that connection with him over the course of just him wearing wrestling shirts to class and talking about wrestling. And then I became sort of a mentor to him after he was like opening up about something. And I'm like, yeah, we're talking about wrestling today, but something's going on with you. I don't understand what's going on. You want to talk about it? And then they want to talk about it a little bit more because they've already gotten that relationship developed with you through whatever your mutual interest might have been. For me and this kid, it was pro wrestling at the time. That helped us form a deeper bond. So with the reflective essays that I give, sometimes I'll see that maybe we have a similar movie in common. I remember a time somebody wrote down that they were a big fan of Space Jam, the movie with Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny. And I went over to him and I had at the time I had a Bill Murray Space Jam jersey from the actual movie. And I brought it in. I was like, isn't this cool? So it was a really shy kid. And we were able to open up and actually talk about some movies and go from there. And I know you asked how you get these people to be who they really are. I feel like in general, I've gotten a lot of kids that wouldn't normally open up and haven't opened up maybe in the 4 years that they've been in their high school to open up to me for whatever reason. And I think it does start with building initial connections.
Well, and it's interesting.
I hope I answered your question.
You did, and the thing that I am thinking about is, that there's so many educators out there. There's so many teachers, and there are some really fantastic ones. I had some wonderful teachers in elementary school, in grade school, middle school. High school, not so much, because I went to a large high school, and I actually went to 3 different high schools. So on behalf
of high school teachers everywhere, I apologize.
Yes. Anyway, it was really fascinating, and as I think about it, then I think about my dad, who, when he passed away, they did an honorary thing for him at Northwestern University. He was a voice teacher, and they had a memorial service for him. And it was fascinating to me as I came out of that service, because they brought all these incredible singers in to sing and to talk and so forth. And I recognized that he had done the same thing that you had done. Here he was, a really great voice teacher, but the message that I was getting was how he had literally affected their lives to help them to become more successful, to learn to enjoy life, to love, all those types of things. And I recognize that there are teachers out there that do that consciously or even subconsciously. And then there are many teachers that kind of still get into that role that you initially were in, where this is how I have to be, and this is what I should do, and so on and so forth. What would your message to your fellow teachers be, based on your experience of how they can really focus on helping the children and, developing that relationship with the children in an appropriate way, rather than just being that teacher.
I have a quick one-line sentence for that, or two-line sentence for that. I always say, be who you want to be. Don't be who they want you to be. And by that, I mean, you have to develop the style that is right for you. And listen, some teachers may not be able to build the connections that I'm able to build. And that's okay too. Maybe their niche is in content, and that's okay. But at the same time, don't be that drill sergeant if you're not that drill sergeant and that's not your personality. Because kids see right through it. It's so easy to see a transparent teacher. We've all had them. And I'm sure when you were just reflecting on your own teachers, you probably remember the teacher that put on an act. And I firmly believe that teaching is your own personal character times 10, and your personality is blown up. And even though, like, Mr. Cannelis is this high school English teacher, that's not necessarily all I am. So you have to find out what you want to do as a teacher. You can't just be this guy, because if you follow everything people tell you to do, from a college level, even to an administrative level, and I'm very, very, very lucky to be where I am, where administration is very supportive with all that we do, gives us tremendous amounts of freedom to be who we are in the classroom. But you can't just take advice blindly. You can't just take educational advice blindly, because if you do, you're going to be transparent, and you're going to have these kids turn on you like they did on me when I was 21, 22 years old, trying to control a classroom. And it is just is what it is. Kids are smart. Kids are smarter now than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They are more with it in the world. Now, don't get me wrong, are they bogged down by societal influences just as we were? Yeah. But at the same time, I think that a good teacher shines through no matter what, if their personality is able to shine through. Because we talked about this on my podcast as well, and me and Anthony were kind of going back and forth on this a little bit. Anybody could teach writing. Anybody could teach how to analyze literature. Anybody could teach you some strategies to answer multiple choice questions. That's not necessarily the hard part of the job. The hard part of the job is the connections. And it's also the easiest part, which is something that we got into on our show. But it's, again, I guess a long way to answer a shorter question. It's be who you want to be, even if it means going against what some people are telling you. And I know that there's obviously other factors, but let your personality shine. That's what I have to say.
Well, and the one thing that you haven't talked about that you have, in a way, is this concept of how do we develop better relationships with our children, with those in a business, if we happen to be a manager or whatever, as a teacher. And the one thing that you have done is, number one, focused on the one by looking at each of your individual students and then seeking to understand a way in which you can find some commonality and then start communication. And it's interesting as one does that. I've just had an interesting experience with that, and I'm not going to get into it, but enough other than to say that by opening up a conversation, I was able to have the opportunity to really help someone to work through a process that otherwise they may not have been able to work through on their own. And I think that's so important that we realize as individuals, whether we're teachers or whatever that happens to be, that as we look around us and look at those individuals with whom we might be able to have an effect, particularly as parents, and understand that the only way we can do that is to open up that communication line. And the only way that we can really open up a communication line is to find commonality and then seek to genuinely get into that and then open up that conversation. So I think one of the things that you're doing and sharing today is, in a very different way, is how important that communication is.
I 100% agree with you. And it leads to other things too. It opens the doors for other stuff. I used to have a professor in college, getting my master's degree. He used to say, the kids might not want to work, but they'll work for me. And I took that to heart from the day that I heard that. And I feel like that's 100% true. And it comes from what you just said about building connections. And again, these are strategies that work, I feel, outside of the classroom, not just as a teacher. I feel like, middle management jobs at an Amazon warehouse could use the same exact strategies that I've used in order to get productivity out of an employee. So,
Zach, and when you've talked a lot about Anthony, there's got to be an incredible story behind this. So would you mind sharing with the audience that story?
Sure. There's so many to list. Is there something specific that you want to know?
Well, just the background of, he was in your class, I assume.
Yeah.
And what were his struggles, and how did you start to communicate, and what have you done to literally change his life? Sure.
And to be completely honest, I think he's probably changed my life more than
always happens. And
right, I know. But yeah, so I met him. Oh boy, it feels like much longer ago. But in 2017 or so, when he was a freshman in my class, and he was just this random kid in the class. He was nobody. I told him this. I don't recall the first time I met him. And I always feel like, oh, something came up. I was meaning to silence my phone. But yeah, so I remember not much about him in the first initial meeting, but we, over the course, developed this student-teacher relationship that I hope translated into a mentorship role as time went on. And then the pandemic happened. And before the pandemic happened, I remember him talking all about his boxing career and about how he wanted to be a boxer, how he wanted to be an amateur boxer. And foolishly, I said, oh, okay, that's great. That's awesome. But in my head, I'm like, okay, he's another guy with a dream. And I've had students come up to me and be like, I'm going to be the quarterback for the Giants. I'm going to be an NASCAR driver. I'm going to be a millionaire inventor. And then they never come to be anything. And you're supportive of them. But in your head, it's like, okay, nice dream, kid, but come on, move on. And I almost wrote him off as nothing else. I still wanted to see him box. I still wanted to see all that. But at the end of the day, I just thought he was another story. And another story that would end after he graduated. So the pandemic happens, and I didn't write him off, but I kind of lost touch because we all a million different responsibilities back in 2020, and he, especially as a teacher, and he didn't really contact anybody in the school, and I wasn't his teacher anymore, with somebody else, and he came back his senior year, after COVID was in the rear view. And I remember he came back in this tip-top shape, and he was like, I'm still boxing. I'm still going at it. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm starting to believe in this kid, because he went from freshman year to senior year, and he kept boxing, and he kept at it, and he never wavered. He transformed his body from this short little guy with not an ounce of muscle on him to a guy who's ripped to the gills, and a guy that is in the boxing gym. We actually talked about this. We recorded episode 5 last night. He goes into the boxing gym 335 days out of the year.
Wow.
So he puts in a lot of effort, and I can't give him enough credit for the amount of work that he puts into this. But yeah, so the relationship built up his senior year. and we kept talking about his boxing while also talking about our own lives and what made us so similar. And we discussed our upbringings, and I became more and more of a believer in him. Not that I wouldn't have if he wasn't a boxer. I would have always believed, because we had formed this developed relationship beyond all of that. And he kept inviting me to go to see him box towards the end of his senior year. I'm like, I'll come to one. I'll come to one. So February passes. He wins the fight. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And he shows me the video. He goes, you got to come to the next one. And I'm like, okay, I'll come to the next one. Next one passes. He goes, I won again. You didn't come. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'll come to the next one. And he goes, you better come to the next one. I go, okay, I'll come. I promise you I'll come to the next one. And I go to the next one. And we talked about this on our episode 2. And I bought in fully when I was able to see him box live. And he impressed me more than anybody else that I've ever seen play a sport that I've had as a student and I bought in, just as he did for, I feel like, my class. And we developed this friendship that lasted after he graduated. And to this day, we don't just do the podcast together. We hang out. We go to UFC events. I believe he was with me when I got one of these gloves signed. Yeah, I'm friends with all of his family members. He's brought me into his crew in a way. I'm hoping that I'm still able to mentor him. I send him a text message before every fight. I always say, good luck. If he loses, I'm right there in his corner. He's a great guy, and I'm proud to call him my friend. And I hope I answered your question. I feel like I skirted around your questions out there, Doug, and I'm sorry.
well, so I'm going to go deeper. So
yeah, go deeper.
And here's an interesting observation that I've made. So many times we do things for people and we make a difference in their lives, but we never get the feedback. And it's rare that someone will come back and say, wow, you did this for me, and this is the result. So my question is, has he ever done that for you? Has he ever come to you and said, you know what, you have no idea what you've done for me, but this is it?
Oh, I hope I don't embarrass him, but 100% he has. He sent me this nice message on my birthday this past year. That was really kind of him. And it spoke about how I was always in his corner, no matter what. And that and even on our podcast, he said that I was one of the only people that reached out to him after his very first loss. And that meant a lot to me. I didn't know I was the only person outside of his immediate family that reached out to him. And he said, without that, not necessarily that he would quit or anything like that, but it meant a lot that somebody else outside of his family was in his corner. Because and he's told me this privately, when he's had that initial loss, because he was undefeated for a very, very long time. And when he had that initial loss, it did shake his confidence quite a bit. And to have somebody there that's not sugarcoating things, that's saying, hey, man, you'll get back in there. Hey, man, it's not the end of the world. You're going to win your next fight. And even if you don't win that next fight, you're going to win the next one after that. And he said mostly after the fights, how much those text messages mean to him. I remember texting him. He went on a bit of a losing skid towards the middle of 2023 of last year. And I remember texting him the day of his fight when he finally got that win back, saying, like, look, don't be in your head. Don't do anything like that. Like, stay focused. And he doesn't, I would never say that he credits me with the win, because that would be ridiculous. But he did say how much it meant to him, that I was the one that reached out, that I was able to, connect with him on that level, because a lot of his friends are obviously much younger, and I was his teacher. And I guess it's nice to have, because now I no longer consider myself his mentor necessarily. But I feel like I am that older friend that is in his corner, that does have life experience, and then that he does come to for advice, because if I've lived something already, he'll be able to be like, hey, Cannelis, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm not sure if I should. And I'll be like, oh yeah, here's the pros and cons of it. So he's never not thanked me for anything that I've said to him or done for him. He knows, I think we both know how much we mean to each other, on a very personal level. And without him, there's no podcast. Without me, I'm not sure. but on that note, yes, to answer your question, yes, he has.
Well, and that's
I give you long-winded answers for yes or no questions. That's kind of the deal of my podcast.
That's all right. And I think the important thing for people who are listening to understand is that you can make a difference in someone's life if you're just willing to, number one, open up that communication, number two, not judge, and number three, be there as a support when they fail, and even be there as a greater support when they succeed, and continue to encourage them. It makes such a difference. And the one thing that I have discovered, as I've been doing the podcast and just in my life in general, I remember initially, all right, I just want to touch millions of people. I want to have an effect on millions of people. And finally, I kind of slapped myself in the face and said, you know what? All that's really important is the one. If I can reach one person and make a difference in their lives, when 100%. They start to pass that forward, and then when we start to look at the generational aspect of that, that's going to make a difference in generations for a number of people. And I think that becomes the key for our audience, is to recognize that, you know what, you only need to touch that one. And if you can do that, that's going to make such a difference. I want to change topics just a little bit.
Sure.
Because
yeah.
As a teacher, I'm sure you have really observed this concept. It's really interesting. I got a message from a friend the other day, and they were talking about how one of their son's friends was being bullied. I think they were a little bit, they had some disabilities that they were born with, and they were being bullied, and ultimately, apparently, as a young child, they just tried to commit suicide. And the one thing that I have been fascinated with and really, focused on in the past was this concept of suicide and bullying and the emotional effects that occur with that. As a teacher, have you observed a fair amount of bullying that goes on within your classroom?
Yeah. So, as best I can to protect any identities and stuff like that, and I would never obviously give any of that away. Bullying is probably just as big a problem as it's ever been. It's unfortunate, and a lot of the times nowadays it starts online, and cyberbullying is a huge thing because we have all of these apps now. We have Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok. Facebook is somehow making a comeback. I don't know how that's even possible, but you can't escape anymore like we did when we were younger. And that's one of the most unfortunate parts, because we can quell bullying in a classroom setting. How do we do that is up to the individual teacher. But that also comes from building connections as well, where hopefully, knock on wood, they respect you enough not to do it in front of you, and want to not have it get back to you. But yeah, it's just as prevalent now, and that's terrible that kids still think that, or are driven. It's crazy that it's still a thing, that kids don't know in 2024 how to treat each other, when the only thing that, we have to model it. We have to be the models for respect in society. And I take my responsibility as a teacher very, very seriously. I give respect and I expect respect back. And there's never a disconnect there. And yeah.
So let me ask you a question. And is there a story that you can share with the audience because I think this could be an example, if there is a story, where you had some bullying going on in your classroom, and how did you handle it? And did that in fact make a difference and stop the bullying and help whoever was being bullied come out of that a little bit emotionally?
So I can only speak kind of in generalities on this story, just because I would have to protect whoever is in it.
Exactly.
Just if they listen. But the best, I'll just, for the sake of the story, I'll make up names. Let's say the kid was Bill, and he was being bullied. And he was being bullied on the fact that he was a different race, and he was not fitting in this group project. The best way that I saw to address this situation was you have to call it out. You have to call it out, and you have to say, look, why is there a problem with anybody in this classroom? And you have to speak in generalities. You can't be like, this is the problem that we have in this classroom, because guess what they know? They know that you're talking about them, even if you don't call it out directly. And that's what happened in this case. I remember Bill, the kid that was being picked on, after I called it out in very general terms, being like, that was about me, wasn't it? And I go, yeah. Without saying yeah. And he goes, thank you. And I go, literally anytime. And did it work? Did it get him accepted into a group? No, but it didn't also develop. It was almost like a fire that was being started, and it could have gotten so much worse, where people would have picked on him even more because of his background. And I feel like from that moment forward, we almost had people not jump in to save him, because that would be wrong of me to say. But we had people who also picked up on what I was saying to the class, and that's a big bullying story that I couldn't recall. There's another story too about getting word that students were being cyberbullied, and it's not enough to just do a lesson on cyberbullying, because that's not enough. They're going to be like, who the hell is this talking to us about how we interact on social media? It's just this old man, right? Even though I'm only 32, I'm going to be 32, giving us this lesson. You have to confront it and make it a part of your lesson without making it the lesson. And I remember having these students who were being cyberbullied, almost stopping it, because now our eyes are on you. It's almost like we're watching now. We know about it. And if sometimes an adult knows about something going on, sometimes it stops because they don't want to be that jerk who's doing that online. They don't want to, maybe they didn't realize, maybe the bully didn't realize how much of a negative effect they were having on other people. And I think that happened with this whole cyberbullying thing, because I remember addressing it in class, almost calling it stupid that people were cyberbullying in today's day and age, when everything is recorded online. Nothing ever leaves the internet. It's something that I try to tell the kids on a daily basis. Don't write anything online that you don't want repeated to your parents or whoever is watching you at home, because it's there forever, or your bosses, your future bosses. Think about your future self. And I don't think kids like being called out. And I feel like even if they think they're being called out, I think that helps stop bullying almost at its source. So.
And do you find there's a reason? Is there a commonality among those kids that are bullying, or even adults, but is there a commonality that you have observed as to maybe why they are bullying others?
Yeah, I mean, it's always people that are not confident in themselves. That's 9 times out of 10 when I've seen bullying, it's because somebody else not has been bullied, but they're uncomfortable with who they are, as opposed to going out of their way and doing something because they want to. I really feel, and I'm a big proponent of my students, and I always try and give every single one the benefit of the doubt. I always feel like they are, and obviously not the victim, but they are the ones who wake up in the morning and they are the ones who are unhappy about themselves. So they make others unhappy about themselves, and or try to. Maybe, and you know them in being in the adult world because it happens. We have other people, like I remember being, I was a deli guy at Stop and Shop, and I remember having bullies there. And not that I was ever bullied at Stop and Shop being a deli guy, but I remember these miserable people who hated their job and were just looking for the next thing to do. And then they would like take out their aggression on somebody else. So the commonality is that I feel like they all are trying to make up for something that they don't necessarily have. And it's sad. And beyond that too, you see a lot of it in, a lot of it from my experience has stemmed from jealousy. A lot of them, a lot of bullying stories that I see, whether at firsthand or secondhand accounts, come from bullying people for things that others have that they want, whether it's the girlfriend that they don't have, or the boyfriend they don't have, or the new car that somebody's driving, or the new job that somebody is begging to have. And they're, again, just, I always feel that way. I've felt this way since I've become a teacher, that if you do bully, you're just unhappy with yourself. And on the flip side of this too, a lot of them, and choose to believe them or don't, but a lot of people who are accused of bullying don't realize necessarily that they're the bully. A lot of people don't realize that they are having a deleterious effect on whoever they're choosing to pick on that day, because they'll try and play it off as, I'm joking. Oh, it's fake. Oh, we're friends. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. And that's a commonality that I've seen that's been very prevalent in today's society, more so than 5 years ago, even.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we close the show today, with all of the experiences you've had as a teacher, as an individual, as you've seen all of these things going on, what would be a message that you want to share with the audience that hopefully are some teachers, some parents, some individuals that maybe are bullying, some individuals that maybe are being bullied? Overall, within less than a minute, what would be the message you'd like to share with the audience?
So my main message is to never stop being who you are. Just because somebody else doesn't like who you are, that doesn't mean that you have to stop or change yourself. If you like yourself, there's no reason to change. If you're proud of who you are, keep going, keep pushing. No matter how hard you have to push, you have to keep going forward. And look, I'm a prime example of this. I had a failed podcast 10 years ago, and now I'm coming out with a new podcast, and we're relatively successful already. Anthony, he failed at at a couple of his fights. Guess what? He's going to win another tournament. So never stop pushing. If you have a dream, you have to hold on to it and shoot for the stars, because if you shoot for the stars, you really can accomplish anything. And I firmly believe that you can accomplish anything.
Oh, I love that. And Matthew, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your insights and what you're willing to share, and the fact that you're willing to be open and really talk about these things. So I appreciate you being on the show. One more time, what's the name of your podcast?
Yeah, so we're the Classroads Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook at the Classroads Podcast, and all social media, YouTube. We're putting up all of our episodes on iTunes, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get podcasts. Again, it's the Classroads Podcast, hosted by me, Matthew Cannelis, a high school English teacher, and my co-host is my current friend, former student, amateur boxer, Anthony Vincent Maeda.
Fantastic. Folks, thanks for listening. I hope this has made a difference for you. And I really want you to consider what's been said here and see if there's ways that it can help you to change your own life, and also help to make an effect on other people who you can help. So this is Dr. Doug. Thanks for listening, folks. Hope you'll join us again soon.